As part of my golf club fitting journey, I've already taken a look at what clubs the best players in the PGA Tour use to see what there is to learn from the club choices of the best players in the world. In this video, we turn our attention to the clubs being used by the top Champions Tour pros to discover what the most common individual clubs are amongst the best senior pros, including lofts, shafts and grips. We also take a look into the role sponsorships play in the club choices they make, before analysing if their preferences are the same as their junior colleagues in the PGA Tour, or whether there's anything different we can discover from the golf club setups of Champion Tour pros. Welcome back to the Golfing Focus channel, everybody, and when it comes to the best Champions Tour players selecting the clubs they use, they inevitably have access to a huge number of options. Given golf has also been their job for decades by the time they reach the PGA Champions Tour at the age of 50, senior pros will likely have worked with club manufacturers for years to hone which makes and models they want to test out and adjust before finally putting them into play. The amount of data available in the clubs of top Champions Tour pros is much less than that available in the PGA Tour, but nevertheless we did find detailed club information of 50 of the top 100. And this allowed Golfing Focus to uncover that the most common set of 14 clubs Champions Tour pros play starts with a 9-degree lofted driver, with Ping's G430 LST and TaylorMade Stealth Plus models being the most used. This is followed by a 13.5 to 16.5 degree 3-wood and a 17 to 22 degree hybrid, where Ping's G430 Max and G430 models are the most common respectively. The most used iron set, chosen by over 50%, goes from 4-iron to a pitching wedge that matches the iron set, and Strixon's ZX7 irons were the most played irons we found. 3 Titleist Vokey SM9 wedges of 50 degrees gap, 54 degrees sand and 60 degree lob then follow, before the most common bag is completed with a putter, where Odyssey's White Hot OG 2-ball is the most used model. As we found when we did a similar analysis of the PGA and LPGA tours, however, this setup and these individual clubs are clearly not the only combinations of 14 clubs that Champions Tour players use. Our detailed research found multiple different combinations of clubs being chosen, ranging from John Daly's use of 3 hybrids and only 4 individual irons starting with a 6-iron, to Stuart Sink and Retief Goosen's preference for both pitching and gap stroke utility wedges that match their iron sets. And with players like Stephen Alker and Tim Petrovic carrying 18 and 19 clubs around with them respectively, some pros are obviously constantly changing their setup depending on where they are playing that week, or indeed based on confidence issues. Further, a comparative look at the clubs Champions Tour players use with the clubs we found the top pros in the PGA Tour are choosing would suggest there is little difference in the club choices between the two tours. 2 things do stand out, however, when we looked in more detail at the complete picture of what clubs Champions Tour players use today. Firstly, we found a much greater number of senior pros sacrificing a wedge to add an extra wood, hybrid or longer utility or standard iron into their bag. The preference, therefore, we discovered for senior PGA players choosing 4 wedges rather than 3 was much less than on the main tour, with the split being close to 50-50 in the Champions Tour, while when we last did a similar analysis in the PGA Tour, close to 90% of the top 100 were using 4 wedges. As a result, we therefore also did not see amongst Champion Tour pros the trend we noted, especially among the younger pros in the PGA Tour, of players opting for 4 specialist wedges, in preference to including a pitching wedge matching their iron set in their bag. The second point which stood out from our detailed research is that there is a much greater prevalence of Champions Tour pros playing hybrids by comparison to the choices made by PGA Tour players. While in our most recent analysis of the clubs the top PGA Tour pros play, we found close to 1/3 of them using a hybrid and none of them using 2, on the Senior Tour this percentage was closer to 2/3, with several players choosing to play more than 1. Indeed, and as we've already mentioned, we found the legendary John Daly being one of the Champions Tour pros using 3 hybrids, a 2, 4 and 5 hybrid Ping G430, alongside former PGA champion Y.E. Yang. In fairness, Yang, dubbed the Hybrid King on tour, has long demonstrated a preference for hybrids, and indeed arguably played the most famous hybrid shot in history, when he famously struck his 21-degree hybrid to 6 feet on the 72nd hole of the 2009 USPGA to pip none other than Tiger Woods to the Wanamaker Trophy. That notwithstanding, we discovered a much greater prevalence among Champions Tour pros to put a hybrid in their golf bag compared to PGA Tour players. Just like in the PGA Tour, however, we found a number of the best senior pros tinkering with their club setups as they clearly search for small tweaks and changes in their set, which will save them a stroke or three in a tournament. As we have already noted, a number of Champions Tour players, including former major champions Darren Clarke, Fred Couples and Jim Furyk, regularly take more than 14 clubs on tour to enable them to change 1, 2 or potentially even more of their clubs depending on the type of course they find themselves playing. Tim Petrovic, meanwhile, has 7 different woods, utility irons and hybrids alongside his standard 4-iron to pitching wedge tour edge irons, and it's set up to allow him multiple different options. Steve Flesch carries not 2 but 3 different models of the Callaway Rogue ST driver family, allowing him to alternate between the standard Rogue ST Max and the draw-biased Max D and low spin options. Confidence is also clearly a factor, and Jim Furyk alongside Dickie Pride, for example, take 2 putters around with them on tour. For every pro, therefore, that adds a hybrid into their bag, you'll find others who choose an extra higher numbered wood or utility iron, although we did find fewer utility irons in use by the senior pros compared to the main tour players. All of which brings us neatly onto the topic of sponsorships and endorsements, and the reason why we have hesitated to list any of these brands as the most popular on the Champions Tour rather than the most used. Tour Edge's presence in the Senior Tour, but lack of it in the PGA Tour, is for example clearly in part down to sponsorships, with former major champions Tom Lehman, Mike Weir and Bernard Langer all noted as being endorsed by Tour Edge and therefore duty-bound to play their clubs. As a result, who is paying whom to play their clubs is a key thing to bear in mind when it comes to any thinking on amateur golfers' parts as to whether they want to use the same models that they see a Champions Tour pro use. While it is of course impossible for us to know the details of each Champions Tour pro's endorsement contract, it is usual for them to specify a player has to use at least 8, 9 or even all 14 of their sponsors' models. And that's before you add the requirement of putting the manufacturer's logo on their golf shirt, cap, bag or anywhere else for that matter. Any claim by golf companies to be the most popular club in any category must therefore be seen in this context. Nevertheless, while we found clear examples of pros playing the one brand of clubs based on a sponsorship deal, Ernie Els with Strixon, Cleveland, Davis de Love III with Titleist, and Miguel Angel Jimenez with Ping, there were other points we noted that showed the club choices of the top senior pros don't just come down to who is paying whom, as the most cynical golf gear critics can often suggest. Champions Tour legend Bernard Langer carries 7 different brands of clubs in his bag, for example. Stephen Alker has 6 brands represented in his bag, and although Alker's are across his selection of 17 clubs he chooses from, it seems doubtful that all of those choices come down to money rather than preference. Jerry Kelly and Ken Duke both use 5 different club brands. Notorious golf club tinkerers and multiple major champions Vijay Singh and Padraig Harrington both have 4 and 3 different brands respectively represented in their bag, and this despite Harrington's long-standing and well-known relationship with Wilson. There are also some intriguing endorsement deals we came across, such as that signed by 2023 Champions Tour leading money winner Steve Stricker. His deal with Odyssey is only for his putter, a white hot No. 2 model, and applies only to tournaments on the PGA Champions Tour according to Golf Digest. So although we can't say a golf brand is the most popular in the Champions Tour because it is the best, there are interesting things to note among the club choices of the top senior pros, and on which you may decide you want to base or inform your own club choices. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please do hit that like button and click on one of those boxes on the screen to join us in another one. And as ever, and most importantly, we hope you're enjoying your golf.